Good evening, and welcome back to Midnight Murder and Mystery, true crime told in the dark. Tonight I'm sharing two chilling stories about affairs that turn deadly. What begins as secrets, lies, and betrayal slowly spirals into something far darker and far more dangerous. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and settle in for tonight's true crime in the dark.
A car sits motionless outside a quiet cottage in Castle Rock, Wisconsin. Inside, a man is slumped in the driver's seat. In the trunk, a woman's lifeless body lies curled in the darkness. When authorities arrive, the scene is chilling. A vacuum hose is rigged to the exhaust, funneling carbon monoxide into the vehicle. At first glance, it looks like a tragic double suicide, two desperate souls choosing to end their lives together. But here's the thing, Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan weren't lovers. They weren't even friends. They were two people bound by circumstances neither of them saw coming. Between them, they had 6 children, 4 were Leslie's, 2 were Trevor's. Their families, their community, and even the police believed they had taken their own lives. And for years, that's exactly what the world thought. But the truth was something far more sinister. Because this wasn't a suicide pact. It was murder. A murder so callous, so elaborate, that when the truth finally surfaced, it shocked everyone who had once believed the lie. Tonight, we're unraveling the story of a killer who was as methodical as he was reckless, as intelligent as he was delusional. A man who believed he could outsmart everyone. And for a long time, he did. So buckle in, because this case is unlike anything you've heard before. To understand how this happened, we have to go back. Back to Belfast, Northern Ireland, where a boy named Colin Howell was raised in the shadow of conflict. Born in 1959, Colin grew up in a city divided by Catholic nationalists on one side and Protestant loyalists on the other. But his world revolved around one thing, faith. His parents were devout, evangelical Baptists, and their beliefs shaped every aspect of his life. 3 church services every Sunday, strict religious teachings, a deep desire to be seen as virtuous, godly, and righteous. But Colin wasn't like the other kids. While his peers went to pubs and parties, Colin stayed home, believing such activities were sinful. He was the picture of piety, on the outside, but behind closed doors, it was a different story. By 19, he had developed a secret addiction, pornography. It was an obsession that clashed with his faith, fueling a battle between who he was and who he pretended to be. A battle that would define every major decision in his life. His dream had been to become a missionary, but by the time he finished secondary school, that dream had crumbled. He turned to medicine instead, though not as a doctor. His grades weren't good enough for that, so he settled for dentistry. And it was while training to be a dentist that Colin met the woman who would become his wife, and later his victim. Leslie Clark was everything Colin wasn't, outgoing, warm, full of life. Born in Plymouth in 1960, she had a passion for helping others and pursued a career in nursing. She met Colin while working at a hospital near his university, and the two quickly fell for each other. It was a classic case of opposites attract, but their love story took a dark turn in 1982 when Leslie became pregnant. For Colin, this wasn't just an unexpected challenge. It was a catastrophe, a sin that couldn't be hidden, and in Colin's world, appearance was everything. So, he convinced Leslie to get an abortion. She didn't want to, but she feared losing him more. They traveled to London, where having an abortion was legal. The procedure was done, Colin's problem was solved. Until it happened again. And again. 3 pregnancies. 3 secret trips to London and 3 terminations. For Colin, it was just another way to preserve his image. But for Leslie, it was the beginning of a lifetime of sacrifice. But despite everything, they married. They moved to Coleraine, Northern Ireland, built a life, and started a family. On the outside, they were the perfect Christian couple. Behind closed doors, the cracks were already forming. In 1984, Leslie gave birth to their first child, Matthew. Colin's dental career was taking off, and with their finances stable, Leslie left nursing to be a stay-at-home mother. But she struggled with the transition. She missed her job, her independence. Meanwhile, Colin's expectations were clear. She was to care for the home and children, no questions asked. 2 years later, their daughter Lauren was born. Colin's career flourished. His reputation in the church grew. He even opened his own dental practice. But Leslie? She was drowning. Then came their third child, Daniel. And with it, a new financial burden, a massive house they could barely afford. The stress mounted, and Leslie began fantasizing about leaving. Then she discovered the affair. Not his first. And, as she would soon find out, not his last. This time, the other woman wasn't just some fling. She was Hazel Buchanan, a married nursery school assistant, a mother, and a fellow churchgoer. And crucially, just as unhappy in her own marriage as Colin was in his. What started as flirtation turned into something far more serious. Sneaking around at church, secret rendezvous in Colin's dentist chair, hidden moments in secluded parks, and then the ultimate complication, Hazel became pregnant. Colin had a solution, the same one he had forced on Leslie. It was another trip to London, another abortion. But this time, the affair didn't stay hidden for long. The church had found out, leading to their pastor confronting them. Colin had denied it at first. But Hazel had confessed. Their reputations had been shattered. Colin lost his leadership role in the church. Hazel's husband, Trevor, was devastated. Leslie was broken. She had just given birth to their fourth child. She was already battling depression. And now, she learned her husband had betrayed her, again. She started to spiral, turning to alcohol alongside antidepressants. One night, in the depths of despair, she even tried to take her own life. Colin had found her note and called for help. Luckily, Leslie survived. But that note, the one detailing her pain, her desperation, would later become the key to Colin's grand plan. Colin wasn't going to divorce Leslie. That would mean public shame. But he needed her gone. Hazel's husband Trevor was also a problem that stood in the way of their future together. So Colin devised a plan. On the morning of May 19, 1991, a church elder received a call from Colin Howell. Leslie hadn't come home, and her car was missing. He suggested she might be with Trevor. It was supposed to be a simple welfare check. A church elder had driven to a cottage in Castle Rock, Wisconsin, searching for two missing people, Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan. Colin Howell had asked him to check the property, suggesting that the two had run off together after struggling to cope with their spouses' affairs. But when the elder arrived, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of Leslie or Trevor. So, he returned home and reported his findings to Colin. A few hours later, Colin was insistent, urging the elder to go back and check again, this time handing him the keys to the cottage. Sensing something wasn't right, the elder brought a police officer with him. Inside the garage, they found the car. Trevor was slumped in the driver's seat, lifeless. Leslie was in the trunk, her body unnaturally curled up in the cramped space. A vacuum hose lay nearby, loosely attached to the car's exhaust. She was wearing headphones, connected to a Walkman, and was surrounded by family photos. The forensic medical officer pronounced them both dead at 2:15 p.m., estimating they had been gone for at least 12 hours. Carbon monoxide poisoning was determined to be the cause of death. Given the setup, it seemed to confirm what Colin and Hazel had already told authorities, that their spouses, devastated by the betrayal, had made a tragic pact to end their lives together. But had they? One of the first red flags was the positioning of the driver's seat. Trevor was a tall man, yet the seat was pushed far forward, too far for his legs to fit comfortably. His foot was even dangling out of the open car door, an unnatural position for someone supposedly in control of the vehicle. That detail alone suggested someone shorter had driven the car that night. And Colin Howell was significantly shorter than Trevor. Then there was the issue of the open car door and the rolled-down window. If this was a double suicide by carbon monoxide, why leave openings that would allow the fumes to escape? It was an ineffective way to ensure death. And why were Trevor and Leslie in separate parts of the vehicle? If they had truly made a suicide pact, wouldn't they have chosen to die side by side? Leslie's shoes were barely on her feet, making it highly unlikely that she had voluntarily climbed into the trunk herself. Then came the injuries. Trevor had bruising around his mouth and nose, blood seeping from the back of his head. Colin had a simple explanation. Trevor had been in a minor altercation earlier. The police accepted it without further scrutiny. Blood was found on Trevor's sweatshirt, but authorities never tested it to see who it belonged to. Even Colin himself had a fresh cut on his forehead. He told officers he had bumped his head. No one questioned it. Despite all these discrepancies, the police never pushed Colin or Hazel for answers. They never asked why Colin had been so insistent about checking that particular cottage. How had he known with such certainty where they would be found? And yet, he and Hazel were considered credible witnesses, despite the fact that both had already been caught lying about their affair. Then there were whispers of something darker. Friends of Leslie's told police that Colin had recently dropped an electrical cable into her bathwater while she was inside, seemingly trying to electrocute her. Authorities dismissed it, and there was the money. Colin was drowning in debt, but investigators failed to explore a financial motive. No one looked into the life insurance policies on both victims. Not everyone bought the suicide story. Some questioned Trevor's injuries. A police officer even voiced suspicions about Colin. But in the end, none of it mattered. Colin Howell was a well-respected dentist, a man of faith, a pillar of the community. The deaths were ruled self-inflicted. The case was closed. The paperwork was filed, and eventually lost. Colin Howell and Hazel Buchanan had just gotten away with murder. From the moment Colin realized his marriage was over, he was already planning his way out. Divorce was out of the question. It would mean public disgrace, financial ruin, and humiliation within their religious community. No, Colin needed something cleaner, something final. Then he remembered the note, the one Leslie had written before her failed suicide attempt, the one that spelled out her pain and despair. He saw its potential. He could use it and make it part of his plan. Sometime in mid-1991, Colin shared his plan with Hazel on how they could have a future together. He told her it would depend on them ending their marriages. Not through divorce, but through death, and Hazel agreed. On May 18, 1991, their youngest son's second birthday, Colin put his plan into motion. First, he wedged a hockey stick under his children's bedroom doors to prevent them from leaving their rooms. Then he waited. Leslie had taken to sleeping on the lounge sofa, a symptom of their collapsing marriage. Once she had drifted off, Colin retrieved a hose he had modified earlier that day, cutting the ends off a baby bottle to make a snug connection between the hose and the car's exhaust pipe. He started the engine, but when he checked on Leslie, he wasn't satisfied with how quickly the fumes were filling the room. So he took the hose, tucked it under the blanket covering her, and placed it close to her face. Then Leslie stirred. She called out for their eldest son, Matthew. Panicked, Colin held her down, pulling the blanket tighter over her head, forcing her to inhale the lethal gas. He waited. He watched, until she stopped moving. Once he was sure she was dead, he loaded her body into the trunk of the car and called Hazel. "I'm finished with Leslie. Is everything ready?" At Hazel's house, Trevor was already drugged. Earlier that night, Hazel had crushed sedatives into his tuna sandwich, just as Colin had instructed. When Colin arrived, he ran a hose from the garage, leading the carbon monoxide into Hazel's bedroom, where Trevor lay in a deep sleep. But something went wrong. Trevor woke up. Dazed but aware something was happening, the trained police officer fought back. Colin hadn't expected a struggle. The two men wrestled on the floor, carbon monoxide still filling the room. At one point, Colin became dizzy from inhaling the fumes himself. But he recovered first. He forced the hose back into Trevor's mouth, held him down, and covered his head with a blanket, just like he had done to Leslie. On the other side of the bedroom door, Hazel listened. She later claimed she had covered her ears. Trevor had now stopped moving. Colin and Hazel knew they had to be meticulous. Trevor's body was changed out of his pajamas and into the clothes Hazel had laid out. Meanwhile, Hazel cleaned the scene, burning the hose, scrubbing the floors, washing the bed linens. Colin then drove both bodies to the cottage that had once belonged to Leslie's late father. He staged the scene. Trevor is in the driver's seat. Leslie in the trunk. Her Walkman playing and family photos are carefully placed around her. A note from her earlier suicide attempt was left at home, ready to be used as evidence. Then he set up the vacuum hose, started the car, closed the garage door, and left. On a bike that he had stashed nearby, he rode home through the dark. With the deaths officially ruled as suicides, Colin and Hazel cashed in. Colin collected £414,000, equivalent to around $575,000 today, from Leslie's life insurance, will, and inheritance. Hazel received £130,000 from insurance and later claimed payouts from Trevor's police pension. They took a 6-week break from their relationship. Then, they resumed their affair. But Hazel was different now. The guilt consumed her. She could barely bring herself to be intimate with Colin. So once again, Colin had a solution. He introduced Hazel to nitrous oxide, laughing gas. He told her it would help her relax. When that wasn't enough, he used a stronger sedative. Hazel wasn't just trapped in the memory of what they had done. Now she was trapped in something far worse. For years, Colin Howell had gotten away with murder, literally. But even after eliminating the two people standing in the way of his relationship with Hazel Buchanan, his world didn't unfold the way he had imagined. Their affair, once so intoxicating, began to sour. Guilt ate away at Hazel, making her increasingly distant. She refused to engage with Colin, withdrawing as she contemplated her next steps. For Colin, this was a problem, and whenever Colin Howell had a problem, he always found a solution. His answer this time was his patience. If sedatives had worked so well on Hazel, why not use them on others? Colin began using his position as a dentist to assault female patients while they were unconscious under pre-surgical sedatives. The drugs he administered caused memory loss, meaning that many of his victims never realized what had been done to them. But some did. Over time, at least 6 women came forward, reporting disturbing encounters with Colin. A pattern of abuse emerged, one that revealed the depths of his depravity. But still, no one linked him to anything more sinister. Meanwhile, his relationship with Hazel was unraveling. 5 years after the murders, in 1996, Hazel finally ended things. Their relationship was now out in the open, but it was no longer what she wanted. She moved on, later marrying a police officer named David Stewart in 2005. The former nursery school assistant now lived in a luxury home outside Coleraine, immersing herself in the police community's social scene. The local press frequently captured photos of her at charity events, dressed in glamorous ball gowns, a respected woman in high society. And Colin? He moved on too. Within a year of his split from Hazel, the 37-year-old father of 4 met a woman named Kyle Jorgensen in a Bible study class. She was a 30-year-old American who had moved to Ireland after escaping an abusive first marriage. Divorced, raising 2 children on her own, she was vulnerable, just the way Colin liked it. 5 months later, they were married. The couple merged their families, and within a year, Kyle gave birth to their first son, Eric. And then, as she sat in the kitchen feeding their newborn, Colin told her everything. Out of nowhere, Colin confessed to murdering Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan. But that wasn't all. He also admitted he was having another affair. Kyle was horrified. She urged him to go to the police. And for a moment, he considered it. But after discussing it, they decided, for the sake of their children, that it was best to stay silent. Still, the weight of his confession haunted Kyle. She confided in a church friend, asking what she should do if her husband had done something terrible. The response? I don't want to hear it. It's before the cross. You shouldn't tell on other people. In other words, God forgives, so she should too. Colin, meanwhile, carried on as if nothing had happened. He claimed his latest affair was over, but he continued to cheat behind Kyle's back. Despite it all, his career thrived. He expanded into cosmetic dentistry and high-end implants, bringing in more money than ever. With the public still unaware of his crimes, he invested in property in Florida and even poured £400,000 into a bizarre buried treasure scheme in the Philippines, convinced that gold had been hidden in caves by Japanese troops in the 1940s. And then in 2007, everything changed. In April 2007, Colin received devastating news. His eldest son, 22-year-old Matthew, had been studying in Russia when he accidentally fell 4 stories from an apartment balcony. He died instantly. Colin was grief-stricken. Then, as if fate had finally caught up to him, he learned that his treasure investment was a scam. In a desperate attempt to recover his money, he traveled to the Philippines. All he received in return for his £350,000 investment, 2 gold bars, worth less than £30. The financial ruin was devastating enough, but Colin wasn't finished self-destructing. When he returned home, he admitted to Kyle that he had lost their savings, including the money meant for their children's education. And since he was already confessing, he threw in another bombshell. Following Matthew's death, he had rekindled his old affair. And for good measure, he also admitted that he was assaulting female patients while they were sedated at his clinic. That was the final straw. Kyle kicked him out. Now penniless, humiliated, and alone, Colin continued working as a dentist. But for the first time in his life, he felt something he wasn't used to: guilt. He began to believe that God was punishing him for his past sins. And in January 2009, Kyle agreed. 1 month after kicking Colin out, Kyle gathered the church elders. She begged him to confess, telling him, "The truth will set you free." And finally, Colin caved. He admitted everything. The elders, stunned, convinced him to turn himself in. And so, nearly 2 decades after he and Hazel got away with murder, the truth finally caught up to them. Colin was arrested. Hazel was taken into custody. Despite his confession, he initially pleaded not guilty. Hazel did the same. Then, just days before his 2010 trial, Colin changed his plea to guilty. On December 3, 2010, Colin Howell was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 21 years. A few months later, he received an additional 5.5 years for indecently assaulting 3 of his patients. Meanwhile, Hazel Stewart went to trial in 2011. Her defense? She claimed Colin had manipulated her, that she wasn't a willing participant, but a passive victim. But the prosecution laid out a different story, one in which Hazel not only knew about the murders but played an active role. Colin himself testified against her, stating that Hazel had never tried to stop him. She only worried about getting caught. It took the jury just over 2 hours to find her guilty. Hazel was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 18 years. Today, Colin Howell is serving his sentence at HMP Magaberry, a high-security prison in Northern Ireland. Now 64, he spends his time immersed in religious activities. Prison staff describe him as polite and well-mannered, but still arrogant, believing himself to be above the regular criminals. At one point, he even applied to be the prison's dentist. He was denied. Hazel Stewart, now 61, continues to serve her sentence at Hydebank Prison in Belfast. In 2013, she appealed her conviction, but it was dismissed. Barring any legal challenges, she will be eligible for parole no sooner than 2029. Meanwhile, the case itself became infamous in Northern Ireland. It inspired the book Let This Be Our Secret and the 2016 TV miniseries The Secret, which Colin reportedly watched from his prison cell. According to sources, he tried to come off as modest but relished the notoriety. One prison worker recalled that Colin, a man who had spent years manipulating and killing to get what he wanted, finally got a taste of justice. After being temporarily moved for his own safety, he was returned to the general prison population, where he promptly received a few well-deserved welcoming gifts from fellow inmates. Colin Howell may have spent nearly 20 years as a free man, but in the end, his sins finally caught up to him, and now he has a lifetime to think about them. That's it for this case. Let us know your thoughts about Colin, Hazel, and the terrifying reality that some people will go to any lengths to get what they want. Because sometimes, the truth really is stranger than fiction. Hey, just a quick interruption. If you like this content, it would mean the world to me if you could hit that like button. It helps me out a lot. And if you haven't subscribed yet, why not? It's free. Leave a comment if you would like me to cover any true crime stories. Okay, let's get back to it.
This case took place in 2018. It's a relatively recent story, yet it never seemed to receive the widespread attention that many other cases did. Despite that, the people who are familiar with it often have very strong opinions about what happened. At the center of the story are Mark Gerardo and his wife, Janaire Cox. Mark and Janaire first met in 1986 when they were both teenagers. Mark was 18 years old at the time, and Janaire was around the same age. Janaire was working at a Taco Bell when Mark first noticed her, immediately drawn to her confidence and personality. Around that same time, both of them became involved in a show choir, where they spent their time singing, dancing, and performing choreographed routines. Although they spent time together in the choir, they didn't actually begin dating during that period. It wasn't until several years later, about 4 years after the choir had ended, that the two happened to run into each other again. That chance meeting eventually led to them starting a relationship. According to Mark, Janaire had a personality that immediately stood out. She was outspoken, confident, and never afraid to speak her mind. Many people described her as bold and independent, while Mark saw himself as much more reserved and shy. In many ways, they were complete opposites, and it was that difference that seemed to draw them together. Their relationship moved quickly. Within only a few months of dating, the two had grown very close and deeply invested in each other. Janae reportedly believed early on that Mark was the person she wanted to spend her life with, and the couple were rarely seen apart. Friends and family around them often said they expected the two would eventually marry, and in October of 1993, they did. Their wedding was a large celebration, marking the start of what they believed would be a long and happy life together. Over the years, the couple discussed the possibility of having children, but eventually decided not to. Instead, they filled their home with dogs, which became an important part of their lives. With just the two of them, they were able to focus heavily on their relationship and shared interests. They spent much of their free time outdoors, taking trips, hiking, and traveling together. For many years, their marriage appeared stable. Like any couple, they experienced disagreements from time to time, but Mark later described their relationship as largely steady. They had never separated, and from the outside their life together seemed relatively normal. However, Mark did say that their personalities sometimes clashed. Janae had a strong presence and often liked to have the final word in arguments, something that occasionally led to tension between them. Over time, another major source of stress began to develop: money. The couple had struggled financially after the economic crash of 2008. Like many families during that time, they found it difficult to fully recover from the financial instability that followed. At the time, the couple were living in South Carolina. Mark was still doing well in his career and felt relatively satisfied with his work. Janae, however, had been working at a manufacturing company called Serco Instrumentation, and when the economy declined, she eventually lost her job. The loss of her position was difficult for her. It left both of them feeling stuck and under increasing financial pressure, and arguments about money began to happen more frequently. Then, in 2017, an opportunity appeared that seemed like it could change everything. Mark was offered a job as the creative director at the University of Delaware. Before applying for the position, Mark had actually reached out to someone who worked there, a woman named Meredith Chapman. She responded quickly and helped arrange an interview. Meredith was about 15 years younger than Mark, and initially, he felt somewhat uncertain about interviewing with someone so much younger than himself. He worried the dynamic might feel awkward, but when they finally met in person, those concerns quickly faded. Meredith was highly accomplished and impressive in her own right. By the age of 32, she had already run for Delaware State Senate and had been recognized as one of Delaware's 40 under 40 young achievers. During the interview, the two connected easily. Not only did Mark receive the job offer, but he later admitted that he found himself increasingly drawn to Meredith on a personal level as well. He described her as intelligent, engaging, and far more mature than he had initially expected. After discussing the opportunity with Janae, the couple decided that accepting the job would be a good step forward. At the time, they were still living in South Carolina, so the position required a major transition. Janae suggested that Mark move to Delaware first to get settled, while she remained behind temporarily to prepare their home for renting. The plan was for her to join him once everything was arranged. Not long after starting the new job, Mark was contacted about another opportunity he had previously applied for, this one located in Colorado. Curious about the possibility, he traveled there to explore the offer. But while sitting in the airport during that trip, Mark said he realized something. He didn't want the job in Colorado. He wanted to return to Delaware, and more specifically, he wanted to continue working with Meredith. According to Mark, his feelings for her were growing stronger every day. Eventually, Meredith asked him if he wanted to go out for drinks after work. When they met outside the office environment, the connection between them seemed to deepen. They spent hours talking. Mark opened up about personal struggles in his life, including the loss of his father and other difficult experiences. He later said that speaking with Meredith felt unusually easy, as though he could confide in her in ways he hadn't with others for a long time. During that conversation, he was also honest about the fact that he was married. He told Meredith that his relationship with Janae had become strained, and that the two of them had been facing increasing difficulties. But by the end of the evening, the emotional connection between them had grown undeniable. They kissed. According to Mark, the moment was not planned. It simply just happened. But as soon as it ended, he said he was overwhelmed with guilt, because despite everything, he still loved his wife. Meredith Chapman was not single either. At the time she met Mark, she was married to a man named Luke. The two had been married for about 3 years, but according to Meredith, the relationship was already struggling. She told Mark that their marriage had grown unhappy and that they were no longer in love. In time, she began to express interest in building something more serious with him instead. As Mark later described it, Meredith gave him something he felt had been missing in his marriage. She complimented his work, praised his accomplishments, and seemed genuinely proud of the things he achieved. Over time, that kind of attention became very meaningful to him. As the weeks passed, the two continued seeing each other in secret. While Mark was building this new relationship in Delaware, Jennair was still back in South Carolina, preparing their home to be rented out so she could eventually join him. She had no idea that her husband had already begun an affair. About a month into the relationship, Mark was already telling Meredith that he loved her, and she returned those feelings. Their connection deepened quickly. But eventually, the distance between Mark and Jennair came to an end. In January of 2018, Jennair finished preparing the house and moved to Delaware to reunite with her husband. Almost immediately, she sensed that something had changed. Mark seemed distant and distracted, and it didn't take long before she began to suspect that another woman might be involved. According to Mark, Jennair confronted him directly and asked if Meredith was the person he had been seeing. Mark denied it and told her Meredith was simply a colleague from work and nothing more. Jennair appeared to accept the explanation at first, but in reality she remained deeply suspicious. Determined to confirm what she believed was happening, she began secretly recording Mark's phone conversations and monitoring his communications. And before long, she had what she believed was undeniable proof that he was involved in an affair. On Valentine's Day, the situation finally came to a head. Jennair confronted Mark and revealed that she had evidence of the relationship. She claimed she had even hired a company that was able to retrieve his text messages, photographs, and other information from his phone. Faced with that evidence, Mark realized there was no point denying it any longer, so he admitted everything. More than that, he told Jennair that Meredith was not simply an affair. He said he had fallen in love with her. After more than 20 years of marriage, that admission was devastating. However, Mark did not immediately say he intended to leave the marriage. Instead, the two agreed to try marriage counseling in an attempt to work through their problems, but the situation continued to deteriorate. One day, while getting dressed for a counseling appointment, Mark discovered a small recording device hidden inside the pocket of one of his jackets. The discovery confirmed that Jennair had been listening not only to his phone calls, but possibly even private conversations inside the house. For Mark, it felt like a serious invasion of privacy. The discovery sparked another intense argument between them. During that confrontation, Jennair admitted that she had contacted the University of Delaware and informed them about Mark's affair. She also revealed that she had reached out to Meredith's husband, Luke, and told him everything about the relationship. The affair was no longer a secret. Both marriages had now been exposed. Despite the chaos, Mark and Jennair agreed to continue attending counseling sessions. However, after only 3 sessions, Mark decided he no longer wanted to try to repair the marriage. He wanted a divorce. Meanwhile, Meredith's marriage was also ending. Luke had learned about the affair, and the two began the process of separating. With both marriages falling apart, Mark and Meredith began making plans for a future together. Because the affair had created tension at the University of Delaware, both of them decided it would be best to seek new opportunities elsewhere. Meredith soon accepted a position as an assistant vice president at Villanova University in Pennsylvania. The couple began discussing a move to an area known as the Main Line, one of the most affluent suburbs outside of Philadelphia. While Mark was looking ahead to a new life, Jennair was facing a very different reality. She was now living in a new state with no close friends, no family nearby, and a marriage that was clearly coming to an end. The emotional toll was enormous, and according to Mark, her mental health began to decline as the divorce process moved forward. One night, while the two were still living together, Mark discovered yet another recording device hidden in his jacket. Furious, he confronted Jennair again. The argument quickly escalated. Mark later admitted that he lost his temper during the fight and said things he regretted. According to his account, the argument became so intense that Jennair threatened to jump from a window. Concerned about her mental state, Mark suggested that she seek professional help. Jennair did begin seeing a psychiatrist and appeared to be working toward rebuilding her life. Over time, Mark believed she was slowly beginning to accept that their marriage was ending. The divorce was only weeks away from being finalized, but even as the process moved forward, the two were still living under the same roof. At one point, Jenner presented Mark with a list of conditions she wanted fulfilled before she would sign the final divorce papers. Among them were requests that they spend more time together, taking walks, going out to dinner, and maintaining a sense of normalcy until everything was finalized. From Mark's perspective, it seemed like Jenner was finally coming to terms with the situation, but beneath the surface, the emotions surrounding the breakup were far more complicated. Jealousy, anger, and heartbreak were all building at the same time. Meanwhile, Meredith had already started her new job in Pennsylvania and was settling into a home of her own while waiting for Mark to join her once his divorce was complete. On April 23, 2018, Meredith posted a selfie outside her new university, sharing how excited she was about beginning this new chapter in her life. At the time, she had no idea how quickly everything was about to change. That evening, Mark was supposed to meet Jenner for dinner. The purpose of the meeting was simple: to discuss the final details of their divorce and talk about how they would move forward once the marriage officially ended. Despite everything that had happened between them, Mark believed they might still be able to part on relatively civil terms. He arrived at the restaurant first and sat down to wait. Not long after, he received a text from Jenner saying she had taken a wrong turn and would be a few minutes late. That didn't seem unusual, so he stayed where he was. About 10 minutes later, another message appeared. This time, Jenner told him she wasn't coming after all, and that he should just go home. But then she sent him something else, a photo. The image showed a pile of trash sitting on the street outside someone's house. On top of the trash was a used condom, and according to Mark, it was his. In that moment, he realized what had likely happened. Jenner must have gone to Meredith's house and searched through the trash outside. Finding that condom appeared to confirm what she already believed about the relationship. Shortly after sending the photo, Jenner followed it with another message. "You ruined my life. I hope you never find happiness." Then a final text appeared. "Bye." Concerned and confused, Mark immediately began texting Meredith. She didn't respond. At first, he assumed Jenner had confronted her and that the situation had become emotional or chaotic. Thinking Meredith might be upset or shaken, he decided to drive to her house to check on her. When he arrived, he parked in front and walked around to the back of the house. Through the glass of the back door, he saw something that instantly made his stomach drop. Meredith was lying face down on the kitchen floor. She wasn't moving. Mark rushed inside the house and quickly noticed blood on her leg. She didn't appear to be breathing. Panicked, he ran back outside, shouting and trying to get help. His distress was so noticeable that a nearby neighbor came over to see what was happening. The neighbor went inside the house and checked Meredith for a pulse. There wasn't one. Mark then re-entered the house, still in shock and trying to understand what had happened. As he looked around the room, he noticed another body lying in the living room. It was Jenner. Police were called immediately. By the time officers arrived, both women were already dead. Jenner was 47 years old. Meredith was only 33. When investigators began examining the scene, several things immediately confused them. First, they couldn't initially find the weapon used in the shooting. Second, the situation looked as though someone might have entered the house and killed both women before leaving. For a brief moment, investigators even considered whether Mark himself might be involved. When officers spoke with him, he was visibly upset and reacted angrily at times, something investigators initially interpreted as defensive behavior. But given the situation, it was also clear that he had just discovered the deaths of both his wife and the woman he was planning to build a future with. As the investigation continued, the truth became clearer. When authorities moved Jenner's body, they discovered the gun underneath her. The weapon had been fired twice, with several rounds still remaining in the chamber. Mark was taken to the police station for questioning, but his timeline was quickly confirmed. Receipts showed he had been waiting at the restaurant when the messages from Jenner were sent. The evidence pointed to a different conclusion. Investigators now believe Jenner had carried out a carefully planned attack. According to their reconstruction of events, Jenner had gone to Meredith's house earlier that evening. After searching through the trash outside and finding evidence of the affair, she entered the home and waited for Meredith to return. When Meredith arrived home sometime between 5 and 6 o'clock, investigators believe Jenner attacked almost immediately. Meredith was shocked shortly after entering the house. Moments later, Jenner sent the final messages to Mark before turning the gun on herself. As the case became public, media coverage spread quickly. The story had all the elements that attract national attention: a long marriage ending in betrayal, an affair, and a violent confrontation that ended in tragedy. But investigators were still trying to answer one major question: how long had Jenner been planning this? As they dug deeper, more details began to emerge. One of Meredith's neighbors told police they had seen a woman outside the house in the days leading up to the shooting. The woman had been standing nearby, wearing what appeared to be a trench coat and glasses. At one point, the neighbor even believed the woman might have been wearing a wig. Investigators later determined that the woman had likely been Jenner. About a week before the murders, Jenner had rented a black Cadillac and driven from Wilmington, Delaware to Radnor, Pennsylvania, the area where Meredith lived. A gas station receipt placed her nearby around 2:40 that afternoon. When authorities searched the rental car, they found binoculars, gloves, ammunition, and earplugs inside the vehicle. The items suggested that Jenner may have been preparing for something well in advance. Investigators believe she parked the car near Meredith's home, entered the house, and waited inside. When Meredith arrived home that evening, the plan unfolded. But there was still one lingering mystery. Investigators could not say with certainty whether Jenner had always planned to take her own life that night. Inside the car, officers also found a wig and items that could have helped someone disguise their appearance. Those details raised a chilling possibility. Was Jenner originally planning to escape after the attack? Or did something happen in the moment that led her to change her mind? That question may never be fully answered. However, when investigators examined Jenner's bank records, computer searches, and phone activity, they uncovered even more information that suggested the events of that night had not been spontaneous. They had been building for some time. As investigators continued examining Jenner's digital records and personal belongings, they uncovered a series of discoveries that revealed just how much time and effort had gone into monitoring Mark's life. Earlier that year, in February, Jenner had posted on the neighborhood app Nextdoor, asking local residents for help finding a divorce attorney. In the post, she explained that she had recently moved to Delaware for her husband's new job, and that he was now telling her he wanted a divorce. She wrote that she didn't know anyone in the area and was looking for a reputable and experienced lawyer. Only a month later, she returned to the same app with another request. This time, she asked for recommendations for an experienced marriage counselor who could help a couple on the brink of divorce, mentioning issues such as infidelity, depression, and accountability. To anyone reading those posts, it appeared that Jenner was simply a woman trying to navigate a painful marriage breakdown in a new and unfamiliar place. But behind the scenes, investigators would later discover a much more complicated picture. When Mark told police about the recording devices he had found hidden in his clothes, detectives asked him to carefully inspect the rest of his belongings. During that search, additional devices were discovered, some hidden in clothing, others placed around the house and in his home office. What investigators found next was even more startling. Jenner had been removing those devices every day, downloading the recordings, and then sewing them back into place. She had been listening to the conversations and meticulously transcribing them by hand. When police searched the home, they discovered 12 notebooks, each filled with written transcripts of Mark's conversations. Investigators also found evidence that Jenner had opened a separate bank account. Through that account, she had purchased various items without Mark knowing. Among those purchases was a lock-picking kit, which investigators believe she used to access locked drawers and other personal belongings. She had also purchased computer hacking software and used it to gain access to Mark's devices. In addition, Jenner had obtained DNA testing equipment, which she allegedly used to examine clothing for traces of evidence connected to the affair. Tracking devices had also been installed on both of their vehicles. These were sophisticated GPS trackers, and records showed that Jenner had been monitoring Mark's movements for weeks. According to investigators, she had even given the trackers names, labeling them Lying Jerk for Mark and Meredith. Police later determined that Jenner had also accessed Mark's cell phone, and downloaded hundreds of messages exchanged between him and Meredith. One of the most significant discoveries involved the firearm used in the attack. Records showed that Jenner had purchased the gun approximately 5 weeks before the shooting, on March 20th. Investigators also spoke with the psychiatrist Jenner had been seeing during the months leading up to the tragedy. When asked whether he had noticed any warning signs suggesting she might harm someone, he said he had not. According to the therapist, Jenner spoke about rebuilding her life and moving forward after the divorce. But investigators would soon learn that she had been making very different preparations. Records showed that Jenner had visited a shooting range multiple times in the weeks before the attack, practicing with the firearm she had purchased. On the day of the shooting itself, she had reportedly visited the range just hours before driving to Meredith's house. Inside the home Mark had shared with Jenner, police also found a handwritten letter she had written weeks earlier. In the letter, Jenner reflected on her marriage and the life she had built with Mark. She wrote about how much she had valued being a wife and partner, and how caring for her household had once brought her fulfillment. But the tone of the letter shifted. At one point she wrote that Mark and Meredith could not get away with this, and that she wanted justice and respect. She also wrote that she needed to take matters into her own hands. To investigators, the letter offered a troubling glimpse into her emotional state in the weeks leading up to the killings. Whether Jenner had always planned to take her own life that night remains uncertain. Some evidence suggested she might have intended to leave after the attack, while other details pointed toward the possibility that the murder-suicide had been part of the plan all along. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Mark was devastated. According to those who spoke with him in the hours following the discovery, he repeatedly expressed disbelief that both women were gone. He later said he struggled deeply with guilt, believing that if he had never begun the relationship with Meredith, she might still be alive. After Meredith's death, he even wrote a letter to her, expressing that he wished it had been him instead. Meredith's family also released a statement remembering her as a bright and compassionate person. They described her as a devoted daughter, sister, and friend, whose personality filled every room she entered. At the University of Delaware, colleagues spoke of her intelligence, her ambition, and the energy she brought to her work. They also noted that although her marriage to Luke had ended, the two had managed to separate respectfully and remained on good terms. In the months that followed, Mark made a dramatic change in his own life. He sold most of his belongings, packed what remained into his car, and drove across the country. Eventually, he settled in San Diego, where he began working in marketing for a company connected to luxury resorts. Mark has spoken publicly about the case several times. While he has expressed deep guilt over the events that unfolded, he has never directly said that he believes he is responsible for what happened. In 2020, he published a book titled Irreparable, which recounts his perspective on the events surrounding the tragedy. The book has been controversial, with some readers criticizing it and others seeing it as an attempt to process the trauma he experienced. Since then, Mark has also written about mental health and the importance of recognizing emotional struggles in the people around us. He has spoken about the need to check in on those we care about, especially during times of intense stress or heartbreak. Even now, he says he continues to struggle with the aftermath of what happened. He has said that while he may eventually be able to forgive Jenner for the damage done to his own life, he still finds it difficult to forgive her for what happened to Meredith. The story remains one that raises many questions about relationships, about emotional breaking points, and about how quickly lives can unravel when anger and heartbreak collide. And that's a wrap for tonight's Deadly Affairs episode. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy true crime told in the dark, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss future stories. Thank you for listening. It really is appreciated. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, the truth always comes out in the dark.